Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sandra Alemany from the Institute of Biomechanics of Valencia and co-chair of the Anthropometry Technical Committee of the International Ergonomic Association. In collaboration with my co-chair, Dr. Ju Choi Rokas from the US Army, we are organizing a series of webinars focused on anthropometry data, methods, and applications across a variety of domains. Our goal is to create a platform for knowledge sharing and collaboration among researchers and practitioners while highlighting both foundational and emerging areas in the field. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Dr. Susan Ashdown. She is an emerita professor in the College of Human Ecology at Cornell University, where she conducted research in technical apparel design for 27 years. Her work at Cornell was focused on the intersection of apparel design and technology, particularly through the use of 3D body scanners. Dr. Ashdown also explored a wide range of topics, including the interaction of materials and design, fit assessment, automated custom fit, virtual fit, mass customization, and the development and use of half-scale dress forms, pattern making, and technical apparel design. The work of Dr. Ashdown and her research group is documented in over 100 publications. Dr. Ashdown retired from Cornell in 2018, and she's now active as an editor of apparel pattern making textbooks. She is also an adjunct professor at Washington University in Hyderabad, as well as in the Ontario College of Art and Design in Toronto, teaching and consulting via Zoom. I would like to also comment on an organizational issue related to the webinar platform. I want to remark that there is a section of Q&A, question and answers. You can access to this section in a button that is just in the bottom part of your screen. Please use this section to write there your questions. And now, without further delay, Dr. Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra, for that introduction. I'm very pleased to be here today. It's been interesting the last few days going back over my career and trying to make some shape of it, particularly because when I retired, I more or less retired from research and focused more on my teaching career. It's been kind of interesting. I apologize for the slides you're going to see. I did not try and make it into a cohesive presentation, just grabbed slides from various presentations that I did through the years. So you'll see many different backgrounds, colors, and designs of the slides. So I hope that's not too distracting. So today I want to talk about dimensionality in anthropometry. It transitions from one dimension to three dimensions in measurement, and particularly for the apparel industry, which of course is my field. I wanted to say a little bit more. Oops, how do I do this? Tried this. Okay. I wanted to say a little bit more about my career, particularly my first career. I actually worked in theatrical costuming, technical pattern making, creating costumes for 15 years before I entered the apparel field. And those were very valuable years for me because I worked with a whole range of body sizes and body proportions and body types, and everything from small children to very large people to dogs and horses, and creating costumes for that in a variety of different styles and over the different kinds of silhouettes through the years, many different materials. And that really opened me up to a different kind of career than many of the people that are in apparel design, because it was so much broader than most apparel education encompasses. Then at the age of 38, I decided that I needed a different career and went back to school, got a master's in functional apparel design at Cornell University under Susan Watkins, who is actually the person who established the field of functional apparel design at Cornell University, a great mentor and a great person. But very shortly after that, in 1989, 2 years after that, in my PhD program at the University of Minnesota, I discovered that my real fascination was apparel fit and sizing, because I was so engaged with understanding how clothes and bodies interact from my theatrical career. And I worked with that with the tape measure from 1989 to 1999, so 10 years of research in sizing and fit of apparel. And then I had the great opportunity to get a 3D body scanner. I was only the second apparel program in the country to have a 3D body scanner. And so for the rest of my career, 18 years, I worked with the 3D body scanner, which was amazing. So today I'm going to do kind of 4 different things. I'm going to talk about body measurement by apparel practitioners. I'm going to talk about how that compares to anthropometric methods. And I'm going to talk about how we introduce 3D data in our apparel research. And then I want to briefly hit on a current study of the 3D body in apparel. That's because when I got the scanner, I imagine, like most of us do, I think, that within 5 years, we'd be doing custom fitting from body scans of people. And I should have known better. It's so much more complex than that. And for the last 25 years, I've been watching the different projects, research projects, initiatives that have sprung up around 3D body scanning, and watch them all pretty much fail, or at least not reach the level of usefulness that I think is possible from the new tools we have today. But this current study, it's the only one I've actually been interested enough to follow in any detail and get engaged with. I think is the first one in those 25 years that actually has potential. So I want to talk about it a little bit. So at the end of the presentation. So before the introduction of ready-made clothing, women's clothing was custom made. So you had clothes made for yourself. You went to a dressmaker, or you might have had a maid in your among your in your household that could create patterns and sew clothing, or the women of the family created patterns and sewed clothing. Patterns were made by measuring existing garments. Body measurement was not part of this process at all. Well, you might ask where the first garment came from. I don't know. Probably passed down secondhand from one woman to another. But I think that's very important that you never see a image from this time of somebody measuring a woman. It just doesn't exist because they didn't do that. On the other hand, tailors, going back to the 14th century, worked in guilds, and they conveyed knowledge by transferring knowledge to apprentices. It was a very tight system. It was a very closely guarded system. And they did not have tape measures. They measured by using a parchment strip that they notched with different proportions and indications of different lengths of the body. You only see in the literature from this time, you only see them doing length measurements. You never see them putting this parchment around a body, so don't know how much circumferences were part of this. But the other thing you notice is that they're not measuring the body. Again, the tailors are measuring the clothing. So this was a time of direct measures where we didn't have such a thing. Yeah, so not only with the tailors where you had a parchment strip for things like measuring fabric. This was a stone in Scotland that was used to measure the lengths of fabric that were sold in the marketplace. So direct measures and very regional. The stone in one marketplace would not be the same as the one in the next town. The tailor's system that he used would not be the same as another tailor. Then in the guild system persisted all the way from the 13th century through the early 19th century. Here you see another tailor measuring with the parchment strip. You see one cutting out fabric, some patterns on the wall, and you see the tailor sitting on this high table so that they get the light from the windows because lighting sources were not great, sewing the garments together. Then in the 19th century, this tailor's process of individualized measurings was gradually replaced, and standardized rules for measurement were established. Tape measures with inches were introduced in the apparel field in about 1820. They probably existed earlier in other fields, and proportional drafting systems were developed. And these led to ready-made clothing. I want you to look at this image from the time, which is, again, the tailor's version. And I want you to notice the differences in posture of these different male forms that are indicated here. There are differences in body proportions, of course, but there are also differences in posture. And I think this is important. All this history, I think, is important because it kind of set the path for how we have continued to think of and use measurement. By the early 19th century, there were also drafting systems sold for pattern making for women's clothing, and there began to be schools or processes for teaching women how to do pattern making, and these systems were still based on measurements of the clothing, not the body. So let me back up a little bit because I did get a chance to watch Dr. Garley's presentation, and there are a lot of things that parallel what he was talking about. One of the main ones being that it was during the Civil War that people begin to be measured, bodies begin to be measured, and sizing begin to be developed, or ways of creating ready-made clothing, because they wanted to create ready-made uniforms for the soldiers in the Civil War, and that's really the beginning of what we have today. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. This got a little out of order, but that's okay. So today, apparel patterns are created by three basic methods: drafting from body measurements. This is particularly done by tailors, but also by other apparel practitioners; draping on a dress form; and flat pattern manipulation of slopers. And slopers are basic patterns that are created by one of the other two methods and fitted to an individual or a fit model. And then that becomes the basis for all other styles. And this is the method used by the apparel industry in the major way of creating patterns for apparel. So what about the measurement processes? So I think this is actually very interesting. I have to get my thing out here. Okay. Body measurement by dressmakers. Now, when I'm talking about dressmakers, I'm talking about local craftspersons or seamsters, custom apparel, talking about custom apparel made for individuals, maybe a client if you're a craftsperson for your family or for yourself. And the body measurement tools used are very simple: the tape measure, the yardstick. This actually happens to be a meter stick. And some people use a bendable curve tool to capture curves from the body. That's basically it. In terms of landmarking, very, very little is done in terms of landmarking by dressmakers. There are a couple of supplemental tools, maybe putting a chain around the neck to capture the base of the neck shape, so that measurements you take of the shoulder seam or from the center back down are, the center front are standardized. So they all come from, so they relate to one another properly. Same thing with the waist elastic. Sometimes that's used, not always, by dressmakers. But it's body measurement for apparel manufacturing, very simple. Apparel industry practice is to create apparel silhouettes in standard sizes to sell as ready to wear, and the tools are a tape measure. The basic patterns called slopers, that's a tool that captures the 3D shape of the body, generally of your fit model, and everything you create from that, the styles and the sizes are based on that basic 3D captured surface of the fit model. And then, of course, pattern grading systems that are used to divide or to create different size categories of your clothing. So body measurement of suits and jackets is very different. Okay, going back to the tailors, which had a different historic process. where they were always taking those measurements and drafting on the table. And that's still done by tailors today. Tailoring is very different from dressmaking, from other types of clothing, because the tailored suit does not fit the same way other garments do. It has a series of layers and structures that are created to enhance the contours of the body. The tailor makes the man, and that's very true because the tailored suit is padded and shaped and created in such a way that it doesn't reveal the form underneath, but covers it and enhances it. The tools of the tailor are, again, just the tape measure, but the tailor also, some tailors use specialized devices to capture and record posture, and tailors from time immemorial have been much more sensitive to posture than dressmakers. And that might have to do with the fact that for so many decades, women wore corsets that created an artificial posture that was similar for all women. So might be related to that. Not true today, though. We have different postures. So anthropometric measurements, the anthropometry is a study of the human body measurement, and it's for classification and comparison, whereas dressmakers and tailors are creating individual objects, basically. The tools, the anthropometer, calipers, tape measures, goniometers, and markers for landmarking the body. And some supplemental tools. These are from the Answer 88 study. Position, there's many of them, but these are just examples. A leveler to landmark the arm side position, to put to place those landmarks reliably. A head positioner, which I find quite fascinating because this was pre-3D scanning, and of course today it's totally unnecessary. But at that time, in order to get the kind of measurements we get from a 3D scanner, they needed a positioner that stabilized and held and positioned the head in a very specific way, and then they could measure it quite much more easily. So the comparison of the two systems, anthropometry, which focuses on bone lengths, identifiable landmarks, mostly width steps and many width steps and straight line caliper measures, some surface measurements too, but a lot of straight line measurements. The purpose is to quantify and categorize populations, either to create equipment that population can use properly, or clothing. But reliability is the primary goal when you're looking at populations and trying to quantify them. Tailoring and dressmaking, the measurements focus on surfaces, proportions, and posture. Come back to that posture. Landmarks are often generalized or idiosyncratic. Each practitioner has their own way of measuring the body. The purpose is to fit individuals, be it a fit model for an apparel company or an individual, okay? And validity is a primary goal. Will that measurement give me the information I need to create a pattern? Reliability is not as important for the dressmaker. So in anthropometry, it's very as reliable as can be made when doing something as fluid as the human body, but validity can be a problem, particularly for clothing. When you're doing uniforms or functional clothing for people, anthropometry does not always give you the information you need. Tailoring and dressmaking measures, very valid for what they're doing. Reliability can be a problem. But when a tailor or a dressmaker is measuring for their own purpose, reliability is not an issue because they're capturing the information they need from the individual and transferring it directly to the pattern, so that the reliability among different participants is not an issue. On the other hand, measurement studies for apparel sizing systems need reliable measures. And yeah, so here's a good example of that in that the anthropometric measure, again, this is from the 1988 Answer study. The posture of the knuckles together and the arms held parallel to the floor, and then measuring from the center of the back, which is an easy landmark to find, to, I can't remember where they're measuring to, the wrist. I don't think so. I think they're measuring to the knuckle. That you can measure that person again, yeah, the next day and get the same measurement. Not true of all anthropometric measures, by the way, but for this one it is. But it doesn't relate to, for example, the pattern making need for a dress shirt, where what you need is the distance from the back of the neck and to the arm side for the yoke piece of the pattern, and then over the arm, the bent arm for the length of the sleeve. So a tailor or a dressmaker will measure from the cervical. That most, um, uh, although not all, most dressmakers will look for that bone. And then across the shoulder to the point of the shoulder, may look for, yeah, that one's more generalized and very idiosyncratic, where someone would place that. And then have some kind of bend in the arm, but that is also very idiosyncratic, how much bend you introduce to go down to the elbow and then to the wrist. And then it always ends at the placement of the cuff, where you want the cuff to sit on the arm. So you can see that that's a very direct measurement that will give you exactly the information you need to create or to verify that pattern, whereas the anthropometric measurement will not. I've had many discussions, particularly with Bruce Brattmiller through the years, talking about the fact that the anthropometric measures don't give information that the pattern makers need for apparel, and that sometimes it might be necessary to figure out a way to maybe not have the most reliable measurement across population, but at least give you a measurement that you can use. And the best example of this is the side seam and the arc measurements. So arc measurements for dressmaking are very important. We do generally a front arc and a back arc at the bust level, at the waist level, and the hip level, sometimes the high hip, sometimes the abdomen. And the reason for this is, of course, we're bilaterally symmetrical across the sagittal plane. That's why this measurement is only taken from the side seam to the center on this dress form, because it will just be doubled to give the actual arc measurement. But we're not bilaterally symmetrical across the frontal plane. So we vary enormously in our body configuration across the sagittal plane. These images were taken for a study with Simeon Gill and Catherine Brownbridge at Manchester Metropolitan University. We were looking at body scanning and how it can capture or establish side seam, which is so important to us. And these are just some of the images. They're individuals and also dress forms. This is a dress form, and I think all of these are, some of those are dress forms. That is, and that is. And some of the others, this one is probably a dress form. So, and this set of indications of where the side seam is was made by looking at apparel practitioners and what they chose as the position of the side seam. The study went on to look at different ways of automatically identifying side seam position, and the conclusion was that none of them aligned with what apparel practitioners do. It's not an easy thing to do. We do not have a side seam tattooed on our body. There are very few landmarks that will be useful. It relates to both posture. So when the shoulder swings forward, the side seam needs to be perhaps a bit more forward than, or when it's held back, it might need to be further back a little bit in order to create good balance in the garment. But on the other hand, to have a visual balance of the shapes of the body, you want it to be centered on the side. So it's a judgment call, and so much of apparel measurement for pattern making relates to judgment calls. We have too much variation to come up with hard and fast rules. So the knowledge that an apparel pattern maker has about what's worked in the past feeds into the decisions they make as they measure. And I think that's very important to understand. So why is the side seam so important? I love this quote from a from a very famous designer, Alexander McQueen. I design from the side. That way I get the worst angle of the body. He calls it the worst. I don't think it's the worst. You get all the lumps and bumps, the S-bend of the back, the bum. That way I get a cut and proportion and silhouette that works all the way around the body. And any good apparel practitioner is aware of this and will, whether they recognize it in themselves or not, they apply this concept of designing from the side. So they're important because they create a key division on the pattern. Okay, the front and back portions of the garment are distributed to create balance. It's related absolutely to individual body measurements, and it creates smaller pattern pieces, which are more practical and efficient and helps maintain the straight grain line in all the panels. But the most important thing is to create balance in a garment. And this is, again, something that whether apparel practitioners recognize it or not, it's an important part of fit and one that is that is incorporated all the time in what they do. I guess I didn't talk a lot about fit when I talked about the methods of creating patterns, the 3 methods. Every one of those methods just creates a basic shape that then the next step is to fit it on the individual and adjust it to those individual measurements and those individual body postures and to balance the pattern on the person. The only way you can go direct from pattern to a finished, from one of these methods to a finished pattern is if you have a custom dress form. So a 3-dimensional object that reflects the person's posture, proportions, and measurements. And then you can generally create a pattern that still needs to be fitted and perfected, but has a greater relationship to the body because you can get that balance. You can balance the pattern properly. I don't know, you probably aren't really, you probably don't think about balance much or maybe not aware of it in your clothing. But if you've ever had a garment that as you wore it, it kind of goes and eventually chokes you, or the other way swings forward on your body, you have a garment that's out of balance. Or if you have a pair of pants that the binds to the thighs but's loose behind under the bum, that's a pattern, that's a garment that's out of balance. There's so many different examples of how the fit can be just totally eroded by not having the proper balance of the garment. Okay, so that's kind of where we are with body measurement and apparel. There were studies of populations done to try and improve sizing. The O'Brien and Sheldon study in the 1940s of 15,000 women became the basis for the sizing system we have today. It basically hasn't changed, just with information, better information on and information on changing body circumferences and lengths. It was an interesting study, and O'Brien and Sheldon were mathematicians, and they created a set of sizes, a sizing system with proportional sizes, which we don't have today, but it was impractical in terms of manufacturing. And in, I think it was 1958, the sizing system that we use today was basically created in this country. Other countries were having other kinds of studies and processes to create sizing for their population. Yeah, so the interesting thing about that study was when they did that study, they measured Black women, but when they did their analysis, they eliminated that population from the study. So it's basically our sizes are based on, in the past, are based on a study of Caucasian women only. So anyway, that's that's all. That's from the work I did before I got the body scanner, trying to understand sizing systems and trying to figure out ways to improve them and trying to figure out why they don't work, which they didn't. A lot of reasons. One being that the size designations were just crazy. I mean, men's pants of course, have waist inseam measurements or neck sleeve measurements or chest measurements, things that relate to the body, whereas women's sizes had these strange numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 14, 16, 18, that didn't seem to relate to anything. But if you go back into the history and look at how clothing was manufactured and marketed in the 30s and 40s and 50s, you will see that in catalogs, you can look at the sizes and see that they are made for the 18-year-old woman or the 12-year-old girl. And that's where those size designations came from. So anyway, those are the kinds of things, the only kinds of things I could study before the body scanner. I did use the 1988 answer study to look at population, but again, it didn't have all the measurements I needed to understand it, to make understand sizing for understanding measurements for sizing for apparel. But it did give me at least a valid and reliable study with more than white Caucasian women to work with. So it's pretty interesting work back then. But in the year 2000, the ability to acquire the scanner changed everything that I did in terms of research. So a colleague of mine, Suzanne Locher, and I created the Cornell Body Scan Research Group. And we were able to get funding from the National Textile Center for, I think, about 8 years before that closed down. The government stopped funding research for textiles and apparel at that time. But thank goodness we had enough of a body of research that we could look for other sources of funding. And we also then established, Suzanne Locher and I and others in the department established the PhD program at Cornell, which brought us amazing students. And with all that, we created the Cornell Body Scan Research Group, and it still is going on, but it's morphed into my replacements area of focus, and so it's building on our basis, but then doing different research now, which is the way it should work. It's great. So this is just a screenshot from our old body scanner website, which websites were new too back when we were doing this. So all kinds of new stuff. So anyway, that no longer exists. So we got a Human Solutions Vitus XL scanner, freestanding scanner. We had to raise the ceiling in order to get enough head height to do the scanner, laser-based scanner. This scanner, as all full body scanners at the time, were developed to be an efficient tape measure with automatically derived measurements from the scanner. So my other choice at the time was the CC squared NX12, which is a very good scanner. But the visualization of the scan, as you can see here, was very different. It's just a series of points. And I'm not sure how much it was regularized, because it seems that the body is not, the actual representation of the body is not the same. And ultimately, the visualization of the scan body was key to our research. And because it really helped us to look at it as a 3D model, not just a way to get efficient 1D measurements. So to be able to see that body and see that it's an exact capture of the bodies of our study participants, it was pretty amazing. These were rotatable. I couldn't make it rotate because the technology is way gone that we rotated with, but we could scan somebody. We could get this model up on the screen. We could actually, with a click of a button, make a little rotating video that showed us that body rotating. And I can't emphasize how important that was to us, because it really focused us on the fact that we are not a bunch of individual measurements. We are 3D objects. And that really shaped our research. I tell you, it was not a week before I was totally bored with extracting linear measurements from a scan. It just didn't make any sense to me. Why should I do that? Why should I reduce this wonderful 3D object to a bunch of linear measurements which don't relate to one another well, and don't tell me a lot about that figure. So now I'm just going to show you a bunch of slides from a bunch of studies that we did to kind of give you the shape of the research we did. Some of it went nowhere. Some of it, I think, came up with some really insightful and impactful and interesting information. I can, it doesn't always work that, our research is picked up by someone else and they do the same thing and get it even, but I can see the echoes of a lot of what we've done in modern in research today. And so I feel very good about what we did. First thing we did, which was amazing to me, we did a study of, I think it was 200 women, Liz Claiborne pants. We put them into the size best fit from those Liz Claiborne pants, calculating on the, because if you fit, if you fit at the waist, you don't always fit at the hip. If you fit at the hip, you don't always fit at the waist. So these pants were sized based on best fit at the hip. And then we did the scanning of the person standing in a standard position, and then put them in the pants and scanned them again. And this image is my favorite of all the research we did, because this was the first time that I could actually see fit in 3 dimensions. You can measure clothes, you can measure bodies, you can do all kinds of things. You can imagine what's happening on the inside, but to actually see it was totally revolutionary for us, and to see it in 3 dimensions. This was not my idea. This was based on work by Kathleen Robinette at the Card Lab, helmet study in 1994, so before full 3D body scanning, but there was scanning of heads and helmets. That's where the idea came from. So, and a lot of our work is, and I'm going to show you a lot of images that were the scan of the person, the scan of the garment, equipment, whatever on it, and the various things we were doing with it. So the first thing we did was with this Liz Claiborne study, and we actually were working with circumferences, linear measurements, but because it's a 3D object, we can get that measurement at exactly the same point on the body as the garment falls on the body, which you can't do otherwise. You can only measure the garment flat on the table, and you get a measurement, yeah, but is it the measurement that relates to the 3D body? No, not at all. So this was, again, revolutionary to be able to do that. And again, just be able to understand that there's so much more information in the 3D model: the slice area, the distance between the garment and the body, the surface area, understanding surface area of body and garment in different areas, and the volume, all of these things. But this first circumference one was great because it allowed us to visually and have reliable measurements, accurate measurements that establish something that we knew anyway, but to have it actually graphed out was amazing. And that's that. The population, when not proportioned the same as the fit model overall, will not find good fit in that set of sizes. So this is a measurement of percent change between the body and the pant circumference, again, taken exactly at the right place and around in 3 dimensions. And these subjects are arranged from by rank order by waist to hip ratio circumference, and the ratio of waist to hip circumference, sorry. And the people who are straighter in body are on this side. The people who are rounder in body are greater difference between waist and hip are on this side. So we have hip, waist, and abdomen, hip, abdomen, and waist measurements, and basically it's a measure of misfit. And we were also able to scan the actual fit model that was used in the development of these pants and scan her in the size of the pants that was used as the base for the grading. And yeah, perfectly obvious. The closer you are to the fit model proportions, the better fit you get. As you get out away from those proportions, then your pants are not going to fit. And this goes back to that early O'Brien and Sheldon study that had a whole bunch of different sizes, different proportional sizes that it was never adopted because it wasn't economically feasible to create. It wasn't economically feasible, but it was also not a easy system to work with, because if you have so many different choices in sizes, then you're going to have difficulty understanding which size to go to. If you think when you go to the store, you've got a rack with a nice simple set of small to large, right? And on that one rack, you can choose among them. If you had 10 racks to choose from, you first had to decide which rack to go to based on your proportion and then which size. So I'm going to talk a lot more about ready-to-wear sizing coming up. We also did some functional apparel work. This was cooling vests, and we looked at cooling vests in active positions. So we were able to take slices. These are scans merged, and again, we were able to take slices all the way down the body to get lots of different measurements to understand how each vest fit in each position. It was a really interesting study, and very work intensive back before some of the tools we have now were available, but it was an exciting, again, way to look at things that we never had been able to before. I also had the opportunity to go to the Johnson Space Center for a summer faculty fellow program and worked with them on spacesuit fit, where we scanned the astronaut in their cooling suit and then scanned them in the spacesuit, and that was a lot of fun. But again, we could then see how the equipment was relating to the body in a way that we couldn't see. We could imagine where his arm was in that construct, but we couldn't see it, and it made a big difference in how we understood how the spacesuits were fitting. We did a firefighter study, again, looking at firefighter equipment in active positions. It's always been of interest to me, again, going all the way back to my theater experience. You could give the actor a wonderful costume, but if they couldn't move properly in it, if they couldn't assume the period posture, if they couldn't do the actions that they need to within their character, then it was a failure as a costume. And that is all related to body movement, which we do too little study of, I think. We also looked at fabric variation in garment drape and with dress forms and fabric on the dress form, and also different styles and how they related to the body. And that was quite fun. Yeah, so, and we did a firefighter glove study, and this one was, I think, very impactful because we began to understand the importance of the measurement of the hand that related the crotch between the fingers. And that's something that had never been studied, has not been studied in hand anthropometry. Very simple, just say from the wrist to each crotch. And if that information isn't available, then the glove designer can't understand how to relate the glove to the hand properly. So that one, I was very happy with our results from it. So anyway, those were the layering together. We also looked at different kinds of measurements that weren't taken automatically in the system, linear measurements, but ones that were very interesting and useful to us. This was one that we worked with early on, again, relating to the side seam, relating to the body shape across the frontal plane, and how a pair of pants would fit these two different figures based on the distance from the largest protrusion to the front and the largest protrusion to the back. And that directly translates to a measurement called stride, which is the depth of the depth of the crotch, how far out that crotch curve comes. So we actually, after we discovered this, we found that there's a German, I think it was a German pattern drafting system that did measure this, and they stood their subject up against a wall and put a book on their tummy and then measured from the wall to the tummy. So it's a measurement that's possible to do without a body scanner, but a lot easier to do with the body scanner. So The other thing that we did a lot of work on is understanding body shape variation. These 3 women all wear a size 10 Liz Claiborne pants. Yeah, right. You can imagine it doesn't fit that well on all 3 women. And again, getting the slices and understanding the hip and the waist, okay? Now, what you immediately focus on is the ratio, right? This waist is larger in relationship to the hip. This is the smallest in relation to the hip. This one's in between in relation to the hip. But what is more important to the fit and the fall of these pants is that, because even if you got those proportions right for everyone, they wouldn't fit well. And it's the way that the body's stacked, how the waist relates to the hip on the frontal and the sagittal planes. And you can see that it's very different in each case. This one, the waist, these two, the waist actually protrudes out from the plane of the hip, whereas this one, it's pretty much even with all these body shape variations that are important to clothing fit that we were not even thinking of. We're not really even aware of, and we couldn't visualize without the scanner. So we did a lot of really, I think, sophisticated work on trying to categorize people in different body proportions. This one, again, was a very successful study because we were able to categorize quite well 3 different groups using principal component analysis, and use that information in deciding how to create automated custom fit, but starting with a different pattern shape for each of the groups instead of just starting with one pattern shape and expecting it to be able to be modified for all the others. And again, for all those reasons we talk about, the posture, the balance of the pattern, to get a better balance for each group gave us better results in terms of that fit. But it does not end up being a good system for actually sorting people in the population because, again, it's so complex. You would need to have a scan of each person and go through the analysis process for each person to have it be useful for that. Posture variation, again, I know I've been hitting on this and hitting on it, but it's something that, again, apparel practitioners know and understand, but do they really internalize it? I don't think so. So we did several studies of posture variation. This one was looking at posture and age. We discovered that no, it's not a direct relationship. Your shoulders do not automatically shift forward depending on your age. Although there is an age-related, definitely posture issues. So again, this is so important because the garment hangs from the shoulder, and how it's balanced relates to both the arc measurements, okay, so that distance from the side seam, front and back, but also where the suspension point is on the shoulder and how that relates to the pattern as well. So again, active positions were very important to us. Again, working in the semi-nude and the clothed condition, looking at the changes in measurements, which gives us a lot of information on how to actually create a pair of pants that don't ride up at your crotch, that fit well and are comfortable both sitting and standing. And then measurement of hand positions in active positions, again, incorporating that crotch idea, which was, I think, very useful to actually be able to measure hands in ways that are useful. By now, we had a different scanner that did these more, these small, can create better images of small parts of the body. So anyway, okay, so now I want to talk about ready-to-wear sizing. You know, I worked for, what was it, 28 years in understanding ready-to-wear sizing, and went back to the initial studies that I looked at that said that people vary on a continuous scale and sizes are categorical, and that just doesn't work. You know, you're expecting a person, you're expecting all these people to fit into this size when they have so much variation, and there is no, as Dr. Garley said, there is no average. So making an average size category is not going to help you because people vary too much. And when you make the average one, very often you end up with something that no one fits, because that doesn't exist. And that's an Army study too, way back in the average man, which I found very early in my sizing research. I was pleased. So ready to wear, as it exists today, cannot be ready to wear off the rack. Cannot be for the majority of the population. The whole concept of ready to wear assumes that most people will fit into a limited range of sizes. Doesn't happen. It assumes that most people have average body measurements, can fit in a size category with only a few outliers. Yeah, there are going to be people that can't fit clothing. Doesn't happen. Most everyone is an outlier. And it assumes that the only important factors in fit are body circumferences and lengths. Sandra, how am I doing on time?
Yeah, we are 7 minutes left, so we
Okay.
need to start finishing.
I'm gonna wrap it up. So ready-made clothing was never designed to fit, okay? It was designed to fit with alterations. So alterations were part of the cost of your clothing. You took it straight to the alteration department and made it fit. So historically, that this is a system that can't work, okay? So so I just want to talk briefly about this study. Most studies using 3D scans still focused on 1D measurements, and this study is looking at ways to categorize and capture and describe posture variation using 3D scans, which is the first step in actually incorporating it into automated custom fit or other things. These are great people. They're doing wonderful work, and I recommend their work. Okay. That's it. So I want to acknowledge Cornell and the college and the department that supported me. Rebecca Quinn Morgan was an alumna that gave me money for my original scanner, the National Textile Center and USDA that gave me early research funds. And my colleague, Suzanne Locher, who I love so much, who I'm sorry to say passed away last week. So, but she is a lot of why we did what we did. Project managers through the years were amazing, visiting faculty, postdocs, graduate students, and undergraduates, too numerous to mention. So, okay, questions?
Thank you very much, Susan.
Sure.
So we have some questions in the chat in the Q&A section, so I'm going to start.
Okay.
First question is from Tim Ginsel. Great presentation, Susan. You showed a couple of examples scanning people without and with clothing or equipment. What was your secret method in getting them into the very same pose for both scanning sessions?
Guess what? And we never figured it out. We figured out that the body is a jellyfish. You know, even if we used various positioning methods to position the hips just the right way and in the right space and the angle of the hip just perfect and then the knee was different and the shoulders were different. It really doesn't, there really isn't, as far as we could figure out, a great way to do it. We tried many different, like I say, positioning devices. And in the end, we decided that the best way to do it was to leave it up to the person as much as we could. And part of that was to getting them to relax and assume a normal posture in the scanner, which is important for this research going forward too. Because, you know, when we were scanning in a scan position, you know, to be the most useful for deriving linear measurements. Of course, those measurements weren't the ones we needed because they're in a scanning position and not in a natural position. So, but we did find that for most people, some subjects we could never really get a good result from, but for most people, if we could actually get them to relax their shoulders, to relax their hips, to stand in the same footprint, to relax their knees, to take a deep breath and let it out slowly, and then scan, that we could, if we did that in the clothing, then we got just as good and sometimes better results than when we use positioners. So that's my answer. Yeah.
Okay. So second question.
Hi, Gerald. Yeah.
Gerald, yeah, how good are dressmakers and tailors who use Rockify to take
Yeah.
measurements?
I think that it varies enormously. I think there are some incredibly talented people out there. I think particularly tailors because they do it all the time. And they have a learned understanding, a craft process that they probably can't even describe, but that puts together the body and understands the pattern that relates it in such a way that they can do an excellent job of creating a well-fitting pattern. But everyone needs to fit. Tailors do that, and then they fit the garment on the person, sometimes twice before they finish the garment. So no one has a good enough eye. Well, I know that many places in Thailand, India, the Far East will create clothes for you with just a set of measurements. I have experienced some of those, and the results are incredibly varied. And I think that the ones that fit often fit just happenstance. I think that but I don't know. I haven't studied that, and I haven't had that much experience with some of those people in other cultures. So don't know. Of course, the key to that is that a tailor is doing the same shape, the same silhouette, the same fit over and over and over again. If you're doing different styles, different fits, then you don't have that base of personal experience and understanding that's as much in your fingers as is in your brain, that has built up with that same style. So I hope that answers.
Okay. So next question is, what is needed in the field? What should the new generations of us working in anthropometry focus on?
Yeah, I think it's probably evident from my from my presentation that, in my opinion, need to focus on understanding posture and making sure that you're not getting people into a artificial posture when you measure them. There's got to be a balance between validity and repeatability. There's got to be somewhere that you can find that gives you the measurements you actually need that are repeatable enough and generalizable enough that it's useful. There's got to be a way to capture that bilateral asymmetry across the frontal plane. I mean, we just have to solve that because it's such an important part of the body. And of course, posture, the ways of capturing posture. And that means looking at landmarks and how they line up down the body. And there's very little of that in anthropometry. So if you're looking at clothing, those are the things you need to focus on.
Posture, and let me add also dynamic anthropometry when you are the fit in movement, the fit of the wearables and the clothing when you are performing tasks, especially for workwear in workwear conditions.
Yeah.
So I think it would be also important.
Very important. Yeah, because measurements change with body movement. Yeah.
Yeah, and the same person is asking about the future anthropometry with the development of the artificial intelligence.
I'm gonna waive that question because I had known nothing about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence came in about the same time that I retired, and I looked at that a little bit, and I said, okay, I know how long it's taken me to really understand the technology that I do understand. I could certainly engage with this and try and understand it and try and figure out how it relates to what I already know, but I don't think I have enough years left. So my conscious decision was not to interact with AI. Sorry, find someone else.
Okay. So next question is, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I think many people gravitate to certain clothing brands that have patterns that align with our body shape and posture. This relies on trial and error. Do you see a better way of describing these fits, perhaps more like the dimensions we see in eyewear?
Okay, yeah. What you're describing there is the reason that ready to wear works as well as it does in our country. And that's because the ones that you find that align with your body shape and posture, that is a company whose fit model aligns with your body shape and posture. So because we don't have standardized sizing, thank goodness, because every company has a different fit model. If you can find the company that has a fit model that's like you, then you can you have a better chance of finding good fit. You know, I don't see much useful information of what happens with eyewear, just because that's a structured, solid material that every material that's used to make a pair of glasses is about the same in terms of its material properties. Whereas clothing, fabric, has so much variation from the lightest silk to the heaviest wool. You know, there's just no way to understand or visualize or describe that across the board. So there might be something there, but I can't see it myself. Yeah, just got to go try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have completed the time, but we have only two more questions. So we
Okay.
are going to ask this question. So the next one is from Peter Pisula. So thank you very much. This deserved a part 2 and even a part 3. As someone who has spent almost 20 years working for the UK military, the issue of form and fit of clothing and load carriage and body armor has kept me very busy. We used a 3D body scanner almost 20 years ago, and now we have a new one. In my experience, I have to ask the men not to suck their stomachs in
Yeah.
when being scanned.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the question is, clothing for personnel while moving around, not standing upright.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think the things we found very useful were don't suck in your stomach, don't lock your knees, or relax your shoulders. And sometimes you had to actually go to someone and say, "Arr, come on, relax those shoulders," to get a good posture. Um, the interesting thing about load carriage is that's going to then change the posture of the person as they adjust their posture to carry the load. So that is really interesting. And yeah, someone else can do that research, but I think it's fascinating. Uh, sorry, I've kind of lost track of the question, and I dropped my mouse, so I can't make this. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so and
Yeah,
this is the
okay.
last.
So movement, yeah, yeah, I think you just have to do scanning in different positions and to understand the relationship between moving and standing. Yep, okay.
Okay, and the last question is evaluation stage implemented once a 3D body scanner study is completed, the data has been processed and the sizing table has been obtained? Is this verification performed with human models or is it continue with digital 3D models?
Yeah, I think it varies depending on the person studying. Yeah, the best practice is to, once the size tables have been created, to create the garments in those size tables and then do a fit test, a very extensive fit test of the full range of the population in order to understand what you have done and what you have not done. I think that's the only way. The use of digital 3D models is coming in more, and it might be useful, somewhat useful in this case, just because if you're working with a single type of fabric, a single garment, then the reliability across the different 3D models will probably be fine. But you've got to understand that those 3D models, the creation of the clothing is not based on real fabric properties, or not much all the fabric properties. What we need is a true virtual fabric behavior, which would mean actually tracking every yarn in the weave and every loop in the knit in order to see what that fabric is actually doing. What we do now is pretty crude. So yeah, that's my answer. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, we have finished all the questions. Thank you very much,
You're very
Susan.
welcome.
Great talk.
Thank
It's been a pleasure to have today your all the presentation of your experience and knowledge at the university. I would like to announce that we are organizing 2 more webinars. They will be at the end of June, beginning of July. So stay connected and tuned to our announcements, because yeah, we will have more webinars soon. So thank you very much for the audience and the people attending the webinar. And yeah, have a good
Okay,
day.
thank you for your comments on chat, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.